Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tochi. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. The first time Daniel told Linda about his transfer, the news carried both the taste of victory and the smell of distance. It was a humid evening in Benin City, and the sky was painted in that strange orange glow that comes just before rainfall. Linda sat on the veranda, peeling groundnuts while their children, Zara and little Michael, played with bottle caps on the dusty floor. Daniel arrived home in his usual way, shirt half-tucked, briefcase in one hand, exhaustion in his eyes. He smiled, but there was something rehearsed about it. "Babe," he began, clearing his throat, "they're moving me to Lagos." Promotion came through. For a moment, Linda just stared at him, groundnut shells falling from her fingers. Her heart did a small dance of pride. Her husband had worked hard, and now life seemed to be opening a door. But beneath the joy was a whisper she couldn't quite silence, a quiet fear that distance had teeth. Lagos was 6 hours away. And Lagos, as everyone said, was a city that changed people. She smiled anyway, brushed away her unease, and said softly, "Congratulations, my love. You've earned it." But as Daniel embraced her, the thunder rolled in the distance, as though the sky itself was warning her that blessings sometimes come with hidden storms. The following weeks moved like scenes in a slow film. Daniel became busier, calls, files, travel arrangements, and Linda found herself waking earlier, helping him iron shirts, packing food in small coolers so he wouldn't depend on Lagos restaurants. Their evenings were quieter. The laughter that once filled their home had thinned into polite conversations about logistics and plans. Sometimes, when he spoke of the city, his eyes would glint with something she couldn't name. Perhaps excitement, perhaps escape. "Lagos life is fast," he would say, tapping his phone screen, scrolling through real estate pictures. "But I'll find us a nice place soon. You'll love it." Linda nodded each time, but at night she would lie awake, watching the ceiling fan spin slowly, whispering small prayers into the dark. When the transfer day finally came, the children waved at their father until his car turned out of sight. The silence that followed was thick and unsettling. Linda busied herself with chores, sweeping floors that were already clean, cooking food she didn't feel like eating. That night, she called him. He picked up on the third ring. "I just arrived," he said, his voice drowned in traffic noise. "I'll call you later, okay?" He didn't. She waited anyway. It was the first small crack in the rhythm of their love, the kind that begins softly, unnoticed, like the quiet drip of a leaking tap that eventually floods a room. The early months of their long-distance life carried a strange balance of hope and uncertainty. Every weekend, Daniel would travel down to Benin, sometimes tired, sometimes distant, but always smiling enough to reassure her that everything was fine. He would bring toys for the children and perfume for Linda, little gifts wrapped in city smells. The neighbors often said Linda was lucky. They saw a man who worked in Lagos, who came home every week to his family, who hugged his wife at the gate as though nothing in the world could shake them. They didn't see the calls that went unanswered during the week, the texts that appeared as blue ticks with no reply. Linda convinced herself that love was about patience. "He's working hard for us," she told her sister one afternoon. "That's what matters." Her sister frowned, stirring her tea slowly. "Just make sure work doesn't steal your marriage," she said. But Linda smiled the way people do when they're too tired to argue. Each night, she would talk to Daniel on the phone for a few minutes, his voice distant, echoing with television sounds in the background. She imagined him in a small Lagos flat, alone, tired, maybe eating instant noodles. She never imagined he was sharing those nights with other voices, other laughter. Sometimes denial is the easiest way to keep breathing. By the time Daniel had spent 6 months in Lagos, the rhythm of their marriage had changed entirely. He still came home most weekends, but his visits grew shorter. He started leaving on Sunday mornings instead of evenings, claiming he needed to beat the traffic. He complained more about work, about the noise of the city, about colleagues who annoyed him. Linda listened, always careful not to push too hard. "You sound tired," she would say softly. "Maybe take some time off." He would laugh it off, saying, "You know Lagos doesn't sleep." But she noticed his cologne had changed. The smell on his clothes no longer matched the one she bought for him last Christmas. One evening, while folding his laundry, she found a small gold earring tucked in the corner of his shirt pocket. It wasn't hers. Her fingers froze. For a long time, she stood there, staring at the tiny curve of metal, her breath uneven. Then she placed it quietly back where she found it. When Daniel arrived that weekend, she cooked his favorite meal, egusi soup and pounded yam, and smiled through dinner as though her world wasn't tilting. Love can make a person play blind, even when the truth is standing in the doorway. That night, as Daniel slept, Linda sat by the window, watching the moonlight fall across his face, and wondered if distance was a thing measured by miles or by silence. She didn't know it then, but the city that had given them hope was already taking something far more precious away. The apartment Daniel rented in Lagos sat on Isaac John Street, surrounded by tall palm trees and the endless noise of the city. During the day, the air outside was heavy with the smell of roasted corn and exhaust fumes. At night, music floated from nearby lounges where laughter competed with the hum of generators. For Daniel, it was a new rhythm, the kind of life that promised both chaos and freedom. He liked the way Lagos seemed to forget your name, how everyone minded their business as long as you looked successful. His first few weeks were quiet, mostly work and solitude, but the loneliness that hid inside the walls of his apartment began to whisper. He would come home after long hours at the firm, loosen his tie, and sit by the window watching headlights slide down the street like restless fireflies. He told himself he missed Linda, that he was only tired, that all he needed was rest. But there were nights when rest refused to come. His phone would buzz with messages from colleagues, invitations for drinks, birthday hangouts, random gatherings, and though he declined at first, the walls of his apartment grew tighter each time he said no. One Friday evening, he found himself in a rooftop bar on Victoria Island, the air thick with perfume and city heat. A woman from the office, Cynthia, smiled at him over a glass of wine, her laughter spilling like light in the dark. He told himself it was harmless, a little company, nothing serious. But one harmless evening has a way of opening doors that are better left closed. As the months slipped by, Daniel's weekends in Benin became shorter and less predictable. Sometimes he claimed he had to work late on Friday, promising to come home the next morning, but arriving on Sunday instead. Other times, he would cancel entirely, saying there was a sudden office emergency. Linda tried not to complain. She had learned to wear patience like a second skin. On the weekends he did come, he brought gifts, new clothes for Zara, shoes for Michael, perfume for Linda. They would eat together, talk about school fees and bills, and she would smile because that was what wives were supposed to do. But beneath her calm face lived questions she dared not ask. The calls during the week had become shorter, his voice distracted, his tone distant. When she mentioned the children missing him, he would say, "Work is crazy these days, babe. Lagos is not easy." The words carried truth, but not the kind she wanted. In quiet moments after he left, Linda would sit on the balcony, the sound of passing motorcycles filling the evening, and think of how love changes form, from laughter to habit, from closeness to endurance. The earring she found weeks earlier still haunted her thoughts. It sat hidden in her drawer, a small golden witness to a truth she wasn't ready to face. Sometimes she would take it out, hold it under the light, and wonder whose ear it once adorned. Then she would tuck it away again, pretending she didn't already know the answer. Back in Lagos, Daniel's apartment had become a place of shifting shadows. Cynthia started visiting more often. She was easy to talk to, playful, unafraid to tease him out of his moods. They cooked together sometimes, played music, laughed about the madness of Lagos traffic. For Daniel, it felt like escape, a temporary softness to fill the spaces left by exhaustion and guilt. Yet deep inside, something gnawed at him each time he watched her slip into his shirt after a long evening. He would sit on the couch afterward, phone in hand, staring at Linda's missed calls. He still loved his family, at least that was what he told himself, but love had started to mean convenience, a thing to be tended when time allowed. The neighbors began to notice Cynthia's presence. The young men envied Daniel's charm. The women whispered about his arrogance. One of them, Clara, who lived next door, found herself watching him through half-open blinds, not out of curiosity, but from pity. She had been married once to a man who wore the same mask, the kind that smiled in daylight, but hid betrayal after dark. Each time she saw Daniel escort a new woman into his apartment, she would shake her head and mutter, "Lagos will teach him." Yet even pity has limits. One night, when Daniel came home late with Cynthia laughing too loudly beside him, Clara looked through her window and whispered to herself, "God, give his wife strength. She doesn't know she's married to a storm." Linda's world in Benin continued spinning, slow but heavy. Her days were filled with routine, taking the children to school, managing her small catering business, attending church on Sundays. On the outside, she seemed fine. But there were nights when she sat alone in the living room, staring at the half-empty sofa, wondering when her marriage had become something she had to hold together alone. She tried to keep faith alive, believing distance was only temporary, that Daniel was still the man who once wrote her long letters filled with dreams. When friends visited, she smiled and said he was doing well, that Lagos was treating him kindly. They would nod, impressed, and tell her she was lucky to have a husband with a good job in the city. Sometimes, after they left, she would laugh to herself. Not a happy laugh, but the dry, brittle kind that hides pain. In her quieter hours, she prayed. She asked God to protect Daniel, to help him stay focused, to remember the family that waited for him every weekend. And when he finally called after several missed attempts, she answered quickly, her voice soft and hopeful. "Hey babe," he said. "How are you?" She wanted to tell him everything, the loneliness, the doubts, the fear, but instead she said, "We're fine. The children miss you." He promised to visit soon. After the call ended, she sat in the dim glow of the bulb, whispering to herself, "Soon will come." But even as she said it, her heart ached with the quiet knowledge that promises can be as thin as smoke. The morning Daniel called Linda to invite her to Lagos started like any other. Sunlight leaking through thin curtains, the distant sound of a crying baby next door, the hiss of hot oil from the frying pan. Linda was at the stove, flipping plantains for the children's breakfast when her phone buzzed. She almost didn't pick up because she had gotten used to short, distracted calls. But this time, his voice carried something unfamiliar warmth. "Babe, how are you?" he asked softly. The sound of it startled her. "I'm fine," she replied, cautious but smiling. Daniel hesitated, then said, "I want you to come to Lagos this weekend. Just you. I've been thinking. It's been too long since we had time together." The spatula slipped from her fingers and clattered against the counter. Her heart fluttered in a way it hadn't in months. She wiped her hands on her wrapper, steadying her breath. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Yes," he said quickly. "Pack a small bag. I'll book your bus. I'll be waiting." For the rest of the day, Linda moved like a woman under a spell. She cooked, cleaned, packed, repacked, and checked her reflection in the mirror more times than she could count. Her sister teased her that evening. "Ah, love don't catch you again, oh." Linda laughed shyly, brushing off the comment, but her eyes glistened. She wanted to believe Daniel missed her. She wanted to believe the distance hadn't carved a permanent space between them. That night, as she lay in bed, she whispered a prayer of thanks, her mind painting pictures of their reunion. The two of them walking through the busy streets of Lagos, hand in hand like before, pretending the months apart hadn't dimmed the fire that once lit their days. When Linda arrived in Lagos on Friday morning, the city greeted her with its usual chaos. Traffic snarling at every junction, hawkers balancing trays of fruit and water, horns blaring like angry drums. The bus dropped her off near Acacia, and Daniel was there waiting, leaning on his car, sunglasses hiding the anxiety in his eyes. The moment she saw him, she smiled widely, relief flooding through her chest. He hugged her, and for a second, the world felt right again. "You look tired," she said, brushing a hand over his shoulder. "Lagos will humble anybody," he joked, forcing a laugh. They drove to his apartment in silence at first, the city flashing past in blurs of color and motion. Linda looked out the window, amazed by how alive everything seemed. When they reached his flat, she took in the clean furniture, the city view from the balcony, the faint smell of cologne and new paint. It was smaller than she imagined, but comfortable. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said lightly, trying to tease him. He smiled, though his eyes darted around nervously, checking for signs he might have missed. A forgotten earring, a misplaced hair tie, traces of his double life. The weekend unfolded gently. They cooked together, went to the supermarket, strolled around the estate in the evenings. He made her laugh again, and she allowed herself to forget the cracks that had formed between them. On Sunday morning, as she packed to leave, Daniel helped zip her bag, holding her hand for a little longer than usual. "I'll visit home soon," he promised. She smiled, choosing to believe him, because sometimes faith and love feels safer than facing the truth. As the bus pulled away, she looked back and saw him standing at the gate, waving. She didn't notice the woman across the compound window watching her with a frown, the same woman who knew Daniel's secrets too well. That woman, Clara, spent the rest of that day unable to shake the image of Linda's face, the warmth in her smile, the tenderness in her voice when she greeted the neighbors. Clara lived alone, a widow who had buried her husband 3 years earlier after discovering his betrayal. Since then, She had learned to observe people without speaking too much. She had watched Daniel for months, his late-night visitors, his laughter echoing through the walls, the parade of women whose perfume lingered in the hallway. She had never interfered. Lagos wasn't the kind of place where neighbors fought other people's battles. But something about Linda touched her. Maybe it was the quiet strength in her posture, or the way she carried kindness like a perfume that filled the air around her. On Sunday evening, after Linda left, Clara stood by her window and sighed. "This woman has no idea," she murmured. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel mistakenly sent to the compound's residents group chat, inviting someone named Cynthia to come over, babe. Clara stared at the message, her stomach tightening. That night, she heard voices again from Daniel's apartment, a woman laughing softly, Daniel speaking low, the sound of glasses clinking. She tried to sleep but couldn't. Memories of her own heartbreak resurfaced, how she once ignored signs until betrayal slapped her awake. Around midnight, she made a decision that would change everything. She didn't know Linda well, but she knew what silence cost. She picked up her phone, saved Linda's number from the residence directory Daniel had once shared with the compound, and whispered to herself, "If I don't tell her, who will?" The city outside buzzed with nightlife, but inside Clara's heart, a quiet storm began to brew. Back in Benin, Linda returned to her daily routine, glowing from the weekend that felt almost like a dream. She told her sister about the visit, the laughter, the meals they shared, the promise Daniel made to come home soon. Her sister smiled cautiously, unwilling to spoil her joy, but unconvinced the man she described was the same one she had begun to doubt months ago. Linda didn't notice her hesitation. She was too busy replaying every moment, holding on to hope like it was a fragile thread. But as days turned into weeks, Daniel's calls grew fewer again. "Work is killing me," he said one night when she asked why he hadn't called. "Just bear with me." She agreed, though a small ache formed in her chest. She missed him terribly, but she also missed the man he used to be. Then one Wednesday evening, as she helped Zara with homework, her phone rang. The number was strange. She hesitated before answering. "Hello," she said. A woman's voice came through, steady but hesitant. "Good evening. Is this Linda?" "Yes, who's speaking?" "My name is Clara," the voice said. "I live next door to your husband in Lagos. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I think you need to know something." Linda's heart began to pound. "Know what?" she whispered. "Your husband is not alone tonight," Clara replied softly. "He's with another woman in your house." For a moment, everything froze. The air left her lungs. Her children's voices faded into the background. She gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady herself. "Are you sure?" she managed to ask, though part of her already knew. Clara's voice was calm but firm. "Yes. I wouldn't call if I wasn't." Linda didn't wait to think. She packed a small bag, handed money to her neighbor to watch the kids, and left for the bus park, her hands trembling as though holding her own breaking heart. The night bus from Benin to Lagos felt longer than it ever had. Linda sat by the window, staring out into the darkness as raindrops chased one another down the glass. The hum of the engine was steady, almost hypnotic, but her thoughts refused to quiet. Her fingers tightened around her small black handbag, her heart heavy with questions she didn't know how to ask, answers she wasn't ready to hear. The other passengers slept in awkward positions, their heads nodding with the rhythm of the road, but Linda stayed awake. Her mind replayed Clara's words again and again. Each repetition cut deeper. "He's with another woman. In your house." That sentence had become a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding inside her. She thought of Daniel's voice the last time he called, calm, confident, careless. She thought of the years they had shared, the nights she had prayed for his safety, the mornings she had cooked for him even when tired to her bones. The bus swayed as it hit a pothole, jolting her back into the present. Outside, the night looked endless. Somewhere ahead lay the truth, waiting like an open flame. She had no plan for what to say or do when she saw him. All she knew was that she couldn't sit in Benin pretending not to see what was burning right before her. She looked at her reflection in the glass, tired eyes, trembling lips, and whispered to herself, "Whatever happens, I will face it." The bus rolled into Lagos before dawn, the city already alive with noise. Vendors called out to early commuters, Danfo buses honked impatiently, and the scent of wet asphalt filled the air. Linda stepped down, adjusted her scarf, and hailed a cab. The driver asked where she was headed. "Isaac John Street," she said quietly. He looked at her through the rearview mirror, nodded, and started the engine. The road to Acadia was a blur of streetlights and early morning chaos. The closer the cab got to Daniel's apartment, the faster Linda's heart raced. The driver tried making small talk about the weather, about Lagos traffic, but she barely responded. Her throat was dry, her thoughts crowded. When they reached the estate gate, she paid the fare and walked the rest of the way, dragging her small suitcase behind her. The sky was still gray, the kind of gray that feels like it's holding back tears. The security guard at the gate recognized her from her last visit and greeted her politely. "Madam, good morning," he said. "You come early today." She forced a smile. "Yes, I wanted to surprise him." The guard nodded, opening the gate. "He never knows you're coming, ABI." Linda shook her head, her smile fading. As she walked through the quiet compound, every window seemed to be watching her. Her steps slowed as she reached Daniel's door. The faint hum of music drifted from inside. Her stomach twisted. For a moment, she thought about turning back, about pretending she had never come. But she couldn't. She knocked once, softly. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. From inside, she heard movement, quick, nervous movement. The music stopped abruptly. Her pulse hammered in her ears. "Daniel, it's me," she called. Silence. She waited a few seconds before knocking again. This time his voice came, strained, hesitant. "Linda? What are you doing here?" His tone made her chest tighten. "Open the door," she said. He didn't reply immediately. She could hear muffled whispers inside, hurried footsteps, the sound of something falling. She knew what that meant. She stood still, breathing shallowly, the cold morning air pressing against her skin like ice. After a long pause, the door creaked open. Daniel stood there, shirt rumpled, eyes wide, a smile too forced to be real. "You should have told me you were coming," he said. She looked past him into the apartment, her gaze catching the edge of a woman's handbag on the sofa. Daniel's mind raced faster than his pulse. When he had heard Linda's knock, panic had shot through him like electricity. Cynthia had been lying lazily on the couch, still half asleep, when he whispered urgently, "Get up, it's my wife." She had frozen, eyes wide, confusion written all over her face. "You're what?" she asked, sitting up quickly. "She's outside," he hissed, pulling her toward the back door. The apartment, which usually felt spacious, suddenly felt like a trap. Every second stretched into eternity. He glanced at the front door, then back at Cynthia, who was now trembling slightly. "Go through the corridor," he said, voice low. "Clara's flat is just next door. She won't say anything." He opened the connecting door between the flats and ushered her toward it. But as fate would have it, Clara was already awake, her door slightly open. The look on her face when she saw them stopped him cold. She didn't speak immediately, only folded her arms and stared. "So this is what you've turned your marriage into," she said quietly. Daniel's mouth went dry. "Please, Clara," he whispered. "Help me just this once." She looked at Cynthia, who stood awkwardly behind him, wearing a t-shirt that wasn't hers, and sighed. "Leave her here," she said. "Go open the door for your wife." Her voice was steady, firm, without sympathy. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then did as she said. His hands trembled as he gripped the doorknob. He forced his face into something resembling calm, though inside, panic clawed at his chest. When he opened the door and saw Linda standing there, suitcase in hand, her face pale and tired, a wave of guilt hit him so hard he nearly staggered. "Linda," he said softly, "you didn't tell me you were coming." She stared at him for a long moment, saying nothing. Then, in a voice that cut through the silence, she said, "Where is she?" The question made his throat close. He tried to smile, to deflect, to lie, but the truth was already crawling out from behind the walls that had sheltered it for months. Clara appeared at that moment, stepping out of her flat like a shadow carrying truth. "Linda," she said gently, "come with me." Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with quiet anger. Daniel tried to protest, but she ignored him. Linda followed her without a word, her steps slow and heavy. When Clara opened her door, the scene inside was worse than anything Linda's imagination could have created. Cynthia sat on the edge of the couch, clutching her handbag, tears streaking her face. She looked up as Linda entered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know he was married," she whispered. The room spun. The air grew thick. Linda felt her knees weaken, but she steadied herself on the wall. Her gaze drifted toward Daniel, who had followed them in, his lips moving without sound. The silence that followed was unbearable. The truth had filled every corner of the room, leaving no space for denial. "After everything," Linda said quietly, her voice trembling but controlled, "this is what we've become." Daniel stepped forward, reaching out, but she moved back. "Don't," she warned, her eyes glistening. "You've touched enough that wasn't yours." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, Linda picked up her suitcase. She turned to Clara and whispered, "Thank you." Clara nodded, her face somber. As Linda walked past Daniel toward the door, the sound of her footsteps echoed like slow thunder. She didn't look back. Outside, the city had fully awakened. The sound of car horns filled the air, life moving forward, indifferent to heartbreak. Linda stepped through the gate, her face streaked with tears but her back straight. The sun was rising, bright and unapologetic, as if to remind her that even after the longest night, morning still comes. The sound of her own footsteps followed her out of the compound and into the busy street like a ghost she couldn't shake. The city had awakened completely now, motorbikes weaving through traffic, women shouting prices of bread and akra, the air thick with the smell of wet dust and exhaust fumes. Linda walked as though in a trance, suitcase rolling behind her, tears drying in streaks across her cheeks. Everything felt distant, the noise, the people, even the sunlight. Her mind was still trapped in that room, in the image of Cynthia on the couch, Daniel's face pale and speechless, Clara's eyes full of pity. She reached a corner and stopped, leaning against a street pole to steady herself. She wanted to scream, to curse, to collapse, but nothing came. Her body was numb. A young boy selling newspapers brushed past her, muttering an apology, and the sound jolted her back into motion. She hailed a cab, climbed in, and sat silently as the driver asked where she was heading. "Motor Park," she whispered. He nodded and turned up the radio. The chatter of the morning news filled the silence between them, but Linda heard none of it. Her thoughts moved backward through time, to the nights she had prayed for him, the mornings she had waited for his calls, the times she had defended him when others doubted. All of it now felt like a bad joke life had played on her. When they reached the park, she paid the driver without looking at him and found a seat on a waiting bus. She didn't know if she wanted to go home or just away. As the bus filled with passengers, she watched the city fade through the window, feeling like she was leaving behind not just Lagos, but the last illusion she had ever believed in. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and whispered under her breath, "Never again." Back in the compound, Daniel stood in his living room, staring at the open door long after Linda had gone. The silence felt heavier than the truth itself. The walls seemed to close in on him, the smell of perfume and shame clinging to the air. Cynthia sat still, eyes red, clutching her handbag like it could save her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, but Daniel barely heard her. His mind was somewhere else, chasing after memories that had turned bitter in an instant. He had always known this day might come. The day lies would catch up with him, but he never imagined it would feel this final. Clara stood by her doorway, arms crossed, watching. "You thought you were untouchable," she said softly, not to mock him but to mark the truth. He turned toward her, guilt written across his face, but she looked away. "Clean your mess, Daniel," she said, then shut her door. He looked around the room again, at the half-finished glass of wine, at the couch where everything had fallen apart. Cynthia stood slowly, her face streaked with tears. "I should go," she said, and he nodded numbly. When the door closed behind her, he sank into the nearest chair, burying his face in his hands. His phone buzzed messages, missed calls, but he didn't move. He had nothing left to say. For hours, he sat there in the stillness, haunted by the sound of Linda's voice saying, "You've touched enough that wasn't yours." It replayed like a curse, over and over, until his mind grew raw. By evening, the neighbors were whispering. He could hear them outside, their voices rising and falling, curiosity dripping from every word. But he didn't care anymore. When night came, he turned off the lights and lay on the couch, eyes open, staring into the dark. For the first time in years, he understood what loneliness truly felt like. Linda's return to Benin was quiet. No one at the bus park knew that her world had just fallen apart, and she wanted it that way. She carried herself with a calmness that disguised the storm inside her. When she reached home, the children ran to her, excited and unaware. Zara hugged her legs, asking, "Mummy, where's Daddy?" The question felt like a knife. She forced a smile, crouched down, and said softly, "He's busy, my love. He'll come later." That night, after putting them to bed, she sat alone in the dark living room, the clock ticking loudly on the wall. Her body felt heavy, her heart hollow. She thought of calling Daniel but stopped herself. There was nothing left to say. The betrayal had stolen something deeper than love. It had taken away her trust, her sense of home. She remembered how she had once believed love could survive anything, even distance. But now she saw that distance wasn't the enemy, deceit was. Around midnight, her sister stopped by after hearing she was back early. One look at Linda's face told her everything. She sat beside her quietly, their silence saying more than words ever could. You'll be okay, her sister whispered finally. Linda nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I will, she said, though she didn't believe it yet. When her sister left, she walked to the window and looked out at the streetlights flickering against the quiet neighborhood. The world outside kept moving indifferent. Somewhere in that silence, she made a decision. She would not beg, she would not forgive too easily, and she would not let this break her. Love had failed her, but she still had herself. And that, she realized, was enough to begin again. Days turned into weeks, and though Daniel called many times, she didn't answer. His messages grew longer, then shorter, then stopped altogether. Each one was an apology dressed in different words, but none could undo what had been done. Linda focused on her children and her small business, finding strength in routine. She started going to church again, not for miracles but for peace. The first few Sundays were hard. Every song, every prayer seemed to scrape at the wound, but over time, the ache dulled. People in the neighborhood began to notice the change in her. She smiled more, moved with quiet purpose, spoke gently but firmly. Some whispered that she must have forgiven Daniel. Others said she had met someone new. But the truth was simpler. She had chosen herself. One evening, while closing her shop, she looked up at the sunset painting the sky in orange and gold. It reminded her of the day this whole journey began, the day Daniel first mentioned Lagos. Back then, that color had meant hope, now it meant freedom. She thought of him sometimes, not with anger but with a strange kind of pity. He had traded a good woman for an empty thrill, and now he was paying the price. She no longer wanted revenge, only peace. As night settled over the city, she walked home slowly, the sound of her footsteps steady on the pavement. Life, she realized, was not about avoiding pain but learning to live after it. And though her heart still carried scars, it also carried strength, the kind that comes from surviving what was meant to destroy you. Months slipped by quietly, each one smoothing over the edges of Linda's pain like water shaping stone. Life in Benin resumed its rhythm, steady and unhurried. The city had a way of swallowing heartbreak. Markets still opened, taxis still honked, and children still chased one another through dusty streets. Linda found herself waking earlier than before, her mornings filled with purpose. She cooked breakfast for her children, prepared them for school, then spent the day managing her catering business, taking small orders from offices and event planners. She moved with a sense of quiet determination that made people admire her without knowing her story. Inside, she was still healing, but the wound no longer bled. It only ached sometimes, like an old scar reminding her where she'd been. On some evenings, she would sit outside with a cup of tea, listening to the distant hum of traffic, watching life move on without needing to chase it. The neighbors who once gossiped about Daniel's job now spoke in low tones about his absence. She's stronger than I thought, one woman said one night, watching Linda from across the fence. Linda didn't hear her. She was too busy helping Zara with homework, her laughter mingling with her daughter's. In the stillness of those nights, she realized she no longer waited for the sound of his car, no longer checked her phone for his messages. It was strange how freedom could feel both light and heavy at once. Sometimes she missed what they used to be, not because she wanted him back, but because it was proof that she had once believed in something deeply. Now she believed in herself. And though loneliness visited occasionally, it no longer frightened her. It had become something she could sit with, like an old acquaintance who had overstayed but finally learned to be quiet. In Lagos, Daniel's world had begun to unravel in slow, deliberate fragments. His apartment, once full of noise and movement, had grown silent. The laughter that used to echo against the walls was gone, replaced by the hum of his refrigerator and the occasional buzz of his phone. Work became his only refuge, though even there, he found no real peace. His colleagues had heard whispers about his marriage falling apart, and though no one said it to his face, the pity in their eyes said enough. Clara no longer greeted him when they crossed paths in the hallway. She simply nodded politely, her face expressionless. He missed Linda in ways that surprised him. He missed her voice in the mornings, the way she used to nag him about eating properly, the warmth of her presence, even in silence. He had tried calling a few more times, but each call went unanswered. Eventually, he stopped trying, though the regret remained lodged in his throat like something he couldn't swallow. One evening, he came home to find that the bulb in his corridor had gone out. He replaced it himself, a small thing, but the action felt symbolic, like he was trying to fix a life that no longer worked. That night, he sat by the window watching the city lights flicker, wondering how he had lost everything without realizing it. The faces of the women he had entertained blurred together now, none of them carrying the peace he had thrown away. Regret was a heavy companion, and it followed him everywhere. Some nights, he would scroll through old pictures on his phone, Linda smiling, Zara holding his hand, Michael sleeping on his chest, and each image felt like a door he could never open again. In those quiet moments, the city's noise faded, and only his own guilt remained. By the second year after their separation, Linda had found a new rhythm, not one built around love or longing, but around stability and purpose. Her catering business had grown steadily. Word of her skill spread through offices and churches, and soon she was delivering meals across different parts of the city. She began saving more, investing in better equipment, renting a larger space for her kitchen. People admired her resilience, calling her the woman who never breaks. She smiled at the nickname, though she knew it wasn't strength that kept her going, but necessity. The children were growing fast, their laughter filling every corner of the house. Zara had started secondary school, and Michael was learning to play football. Their joy became her anchor. On weekends, she took them to the park, bought them ice cream, and watched them play beneath the wide Benin sky. Every so often, she would think of Daniel, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of distant compassion. She knew he had tried calling her sister a few times, asking after the children, but she had made her decision clear. "You can send support," she had told him once over a short phone call, "but don't confuse that with reconciliation." After that, he stopped trying to cross the line. The distance between them had settled like dust, final, unmoving. One evening, while closing up her kitchen after a long day, a customer approached her with admiration. "Madam, you're an inspiration," the woman said. "You make it look easy." Linda smiled, shaking her head. "Nothing about life is easy," she replied. "You just learn to keep walking." And that was what she had done, one step after another, through pain, through fear, until peace stopped feeling like a stranger and started feeling like home. Daniel's final attempt to make amends came a few months later, after a business trip took him back to Benin. The city hadn't changed much, the same streets, the same smells, the same quiet air that used to welcome him home. He drove past their old house, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The walls looked different now, freshly painted, flowers blooming in front of the gate. Through the half-open door, he could hear laughter, Linda's, soft but real, blending with the children's voices. He didn't know who else was inside, maybe family, maybe friends. He parked across the street for a moment, watching, unsure whether to approach or drive away. For the first time, he realized that forgiveness wasn't owed, and love wasn't something you could reclaim once you'd shattered it. After a few minutes, he started the engine and left quietly, taking the road out of town. As he drove, the sun dipped below the horizon, washing the sky in red and gold. It reminded him of the early days, of promises whispered under similar skies. But those promises now belonged to a different time, a different man. Somewhere on that road, Daniel finally let go, of excuses, of pride, of the illusion that he could fix what he had destroyed. He returned to Lagos that night a quieter man, the weight of his choices finally settling into acceptance. Meanwhile, back in Benin, Linda stood on her balcony watching the same sunset, unaware that he had been there. The light touched her face softly, and for the first time in a long while, she felt whole. She turned, calling out to her children, laughter following her into the house. The day closed gently around them, carrying no trace of the past, only the steady peace of a woman who had learned that sometimes, survival itself is the purest form of victory. My brothers and sisters, in this life, never let distance blind your heart, and never let temptation steal your peace. Love is not just about promises, it's about presence, honesty, and respect. When trust breaks, it takes more than sorry to rebuild. If you have someone who truly loves you, protect that love like a fragile glass, because once it shatters, the pieces may never fit again. And if life ever throws you pain like Linda's, don't let it drown you. Rise above it, and let your healing be louder than your heartbreak. Remember, peace is not found in another person. Peace begins when you choose yourself. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of understanding, and for reminding us that even through pain, there is purpose. Lord, heal every broken heart listening tonight. Restore trust where it has been betrayed. Bless every home with truth, respect, and loyalty. For those walking through seasons of heartbreak, wrap them in your peace that never ends. Give them strength to forgive, wisdom to move forward, and courage to love again without fear. Let every listener's life overflow with joy, favor, and divine protection. May love return where it is missing, and peace reign in every heart, every home, and every relationship. In Jesus' name we pray, Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.